What's up, friend? I'm Ryan Coral from Studio Sherpas, and here today we're going to talk about the business of commercial video production. That's what we always talk about. We cover topics like sales and marketing, mindset and process, stuff that over the last 17 years has helped me build my own video production business. If you are in that spot of trying to grow your own video business, then you're in the right spot. And I'm so happy that you're here. On this episode of the podcast, we talk about exercise, optimal diet, and optimizing your health. All this and more on episode 297 of the Grow Your Video Business podcast. If you're not happy with the clients that you're landing or the budgets that you're working with, usually those budgets tend to be too small, or maybe you wish that you had a constant stream of new leads coming in. If this is you, I want you to check out my 6-figure commercial filmmaking workshop. This is a free workshop, and it's got my best content on how I've built a 7-figure production company and have stayed in business for over 17 years. You can get access to this workshop if you go to studiosherpas.com/workshop. And I seriously hope that it really helps you wherever you're at in your video business journey. Just a heads up here, for this episode, I just want you to know I am not affiliated in any way with my guest. I'm not a doctor. And if you have questions about any of the stuff that we talk about on this episode, make sure that you talk to your own doctor, healthcare provider, lawyer, whoever. I don't want you to sue me. I don't want you to get mad at me. But in the middle of this conversation, I was like, oh, this could be controversial. I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I definitely wanted to share Dr. Shay's perspective, and I think it's very enlightening. So hopefully you find it enlightening as well. Would love to hear from you. So without any further ado, let's get into this crazy, wild episode. Here we go. Welcome to the show. This is only my 4th time I'm trying this introduction here. I'm so glad that you are here, as well as my guest, who is Dr. Samuel Shay, DCIF MCP, who helps busy, health-conscious entrepreneurs add an extra 5 healthy years of life, liberate $50,000, and add 50 extra quality minutes a day so that they can create more freedom for themselves and others. I'm sure he's going to help us do that today. Dr. Samuel Shay, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate the iterative intro. We got there in the end. We'll make a gag reel. We'll make a gag reel later. How's that?
Unbelievable. I think I'm pretty good at this. And it's moments like these where
I'm glad you think that.
Kind of brought back to. All right, so here's a fun story for you guys. Now, you know how some people, you go on an airplane and you just you put headphones in and you just try to avoid whoever's next to you. You don't want to get in conversation. You don't want to get in small talk. Well, we're here today because Dr. Sam and I, can I call you Dr. Sam?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. We met on an airplane. I don't even remember, we were going Denver or Salt Lake or something like that. I was in between flights.
I believe we were heading either to Denver or to Ashland.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Denver for me. So anyway, we struck up conversation, and look at us now. We're doing a podcast. It's like virtual world meets real world meets virtual world, or something like that.
It's a virtual world.
That's right.
I was very impressed. Analog, virtual, yeah.
So as Dr. Shay was sort of explaining what he does, I was very intrigued. I got home, I signed up for his newsletter. I shared with my wife some of this stuff, and she's like, "Oh my gosh, I gotta meet with this guy, talk with him." So I'm very excited that you're with us. So explain a little bit we got all those letters and things that I said. I have no idea what I'm saying. Hopefully I wasn't incriminating myself or you or anything like that. But what is it that you what is it that you do? Tell us, please.
Sure. So there's designated degrees, and there's this alphabet soup that follows of additional training and all the rest of it. And what I do is that I help busy health conscious entrepreneurs, like you said. I know you said it because I wrote it for you to read it. So, by the way, I know I'm showing how the sausage is made, what's behind the curtain for all the people who are doing the podcast. I send the intro. It's anyway.
It's a whole
So
thing.
I want to help entrepreneurs. I also want to help moms. And the reason why I want to help entrepreneurs and moms is because I grew up being raised by a single mom. Dad, I call him Jonathan now, he paid child support, but was effectively arm's length and absentee, even though he provided. He certainly wasn't present or protective or a part of my life in a significant way. And so my mother was a very stressed out entrepreneur, as she was a clinician, like I am, the different field of being a clinician. Raising us 4 kids, she did have some help, but she did not take care of herself, and she was overwhelmed and stressed and a lot of pain, popping a lot of painkillers, eating rushed food, just not sleeping well at all. And by her own admission, full disclosure, she and I have a really great, really wonderful relationship. She's coming out at the time of this recording. She's coming out next month to come visit for a week, which I super look forward to. Yeah. And for the first 25 years, there was a bit, touch and go there in terms of our relationship was very high friction. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that by her own admission, she made some very bad decisions on my behalf because of her mental and physical state. Very bad. And again, we're reconciled. It's all good. She's come to visit. We're going to have a great time. Yeah. But I want to acknowledge that painful yet very real history, which a lot of people may resonate with either directly or tangentially, that how our health and well-being directly affects others, particularly our family, those that we are responsible for and those around us. Now, if we are an entrepreneur, we are responsible for not just our message or our product, the thing we're trying to change the world. We're also responsible for, our families and the other groups that we're associated with related to that. And when I could have made a decision to shake my tiny fist at the air about how bad it was, based on what the decisions my mother made on my behalf. And instead, I decide to help the version of her in my professional life, help an entrepreneur, mom, either separately or mompreneur, the combination, in order to heal for lack of a better term, the karma, if you will, of what happened to me. So I can help a future version of me in someone else's family instead of raising my tiny fist in resentment to the universe. And that's my inspiration for helping entrepreneurs and moms and mompreneurs. And of course I help other people, but those are the 2 people I'm most motivated to support because the story is so directly visceral and personal to me. And I got into natural medicine actually as a result of my mother's and my father's career. So I was supposed to be the 3rd generation medical doctor in my family. And my grandfather was an extremely famous gastroenterologist. In fact, he was a founding director of the Fells Cancer Research Center at Temple University back in 1937. Oh. And my father is a very famous psychiatrist, wrote 2 books, has a MacArthur Award. And the irony is layered very deeply with that as a whole of the story. His expertise was in trauma and PTSD, and in the name of his career, that was triggered in his son, me. Whole of the story, I'm right. By the way, I know it's hilarious. By the way, I am a stand-up comic on the side. True story. And part of my set that I'm writing out right now is I'm working on discussing what it's like, because I'm on the spectrum. But I'm on the spectrum. My father is the bookend of the spectrum. And what it's like growing up, one, being a standard deviation beyond the quote normies, but also growing up with a father is 1 to 2 standard deviations further along than me. And doing comedy has been a way to bring to light what was never revealed to me. I mean, if I had 15 minutes 30 years ago explaining, hey kid, this is how your brain works. This is your couple superpowers. There's your buffet of kryptonites. This is how you got to learn how to navigate in a normie world. That would have changed my life. So through stand-up comedy, I'm educating not only on natural health, I'm educating on Asperger's, because I wish to, the same ethos of I wish to help some future version of me by helping moms and entrepreneurs. I wish to create that 15-minute summary of, hey kid, here's what Asperger's is like, for some other version of me that could have gotten it 30 years earlier than what I did. Yeah. So I was supposed to be the 3rd generation medical doctor. My mother, also a psychiatrist, I know, hilarious. She, I was supposed to be a third generation medical doctor, and because of I was so ill growing up from all the tremendous amount of stress from the home environment and school environment, and it wasn't really, it was just taken as a psychological issue, not purely the reality is that it's a mixture of chemical, physical, and psychological. I took a hard turn into natural medicine as opposed to Western biomedical medicine. And through that, I went through this very long, circuitous path of, like, I'm a mutt. Like, I'm a chiropractor. I have 2 certifications in functional postdoctorate certifications in functional medicine. I got genetic certification. I'm also an acupuncturist. I trained with the top osteopath in Australasia for a period of time when I was in New Zealand. I've been studying natural nutrition for literally over 20 years of all sorts of different sorts, just functional neurology. I have, like, at one point I had 23 letters in my name. Good for me, whatever. But I'm basically a mutt. And it's this combination effect of looking at all these different angles of how people can be as optimal as possible. And the problem that I find with entrepreneurs is that they're usually fixated on a couple, like, magic bulletisms, and fixated on, if I only find the right coffee and coconut oil combination, it'll be great. Or if I just take the right turmeric extract, or the best goji berry juice to squirt up my nose, or whatever. Or if I have enough red light coming in this way and blocking the blue light coming this way, life will be great. And they're conflating tactics for the strategy. Those things are tactics. They are not strategy. And the strategy is look at all the different pillars of health, of which in my particular model there's 10, and then use lab testing, a combination of functional testing and genetics testing. Functional testing being like hormones, like adrenals and thyroid and sex hormones, like mitochondrial labs, liver, looking at gut health, hidden infections, digestion markers, blood sugar dysregulation, etc. Like, just a huge swath of labs. And genetics is a whole other phenomenon. To get a truly customized, optimized health plan, wellness plan for yourself, so that you can sustain yourself through the trials and tribulations of any entrepreneur. And if anyone's been an entrepreneur, there's lots of those trials and tribulations. And what I think one of the missing things for entrepreneurs is budgeting time, attention, and resources, like a line item in your business, towards your personal health and resilience, your wellness and resilience. Because the business is, at least in the many first stages of business, before one graduates from, operator to, like, manager to owner to investor, like, throughout those journeys, like, you are an integral part of the entire business. Therefore, your resilience determines a huge part of the success of the business. And why entrepreneurs do not budget for, just like they have a marketing budget, they don't have a resilience budget. Like, that's craziness to me. So that's one of the main messages I want to share, aside from some really practical, tactical things people can do to increase their resilience and increase their capacity, so they can succeed in the business, so they can create the freedom for themselves and others.
Yeah, man, that's great. Thanks for sharing all that stuff about your story. That's really powerful, and I love just how your story is weaving together, that even through the hard stuff, right, out of that can come good. And just appreciate you using your gifts and talents to help other people.
Thank you.
That's pretty cool.
You call that a silver lining here in Colorado. What's your silver lining? I'm like,
that's right. So, I would say that, I'm picturing myself the first, 5 years in business. We didn't have kids, and then we had kids, and I was just hustling really, really hard. I had to do all the things. I didn't have any full-time employees for the first 3 years or so, and so you have to wear all the hats, and you got to figure out all the things. And in this work in particular, and maybe it's the same in every business, but in this one, there's some main parts. There's finding clients and all that stuff that every business has to do, but then there's, like, the actual creation of the project, which or product or whatever you want to call it. It's like, the planning, the actual doing, and then there's the editing, and then the re-editing, and then the delivering, and then, just all of those parts. And then also like trying to add in creativity, right? So it's not just like, hey, shoot this thing and then edit the thing. It's like, point A to point B. It's like, no. There's an element of creativity. And then you add in layers of like music or sound and like just so many different parts to all of this. So when you talk about like being optimized and like being able to like, get the stuff done in the best way possible without harming yourself, the easiest thing to, I think, forego is your personal health, because for the most part, like as long as I'm like able to move and I'm able to think and talk, it feels like this is fine. Like I can keep doing this. I can keep getting like no sleep until I have to, sleep for 2 days straight. So I don't know what other, things might be added in there that make us just not think about investing in our, optimal health.
Well, I can tell you, there's substances that anesthetize you to your body's own signals and you're wearing down. So, for example, coffee is a fatigue anesthetic. Simple as that. If people are drinking coffee and like they need it, that's a red flag that your resilience is not good, because you literally are using an anesthetic to cover up the fatigue that your system really has. Another one is pain. Something my mother did. She was taking so many pain medications to deal with her back pain and was not willing to get it properly treated through other means. Other people anesthetize through their anxieties through sugar, Game of Thrones, whatever their vice is. And I also am a former sugar addict and a former video game addict. And I'm being technical when I say that. And there was a lot of numbing out that was going on. Sometimes, if people are entrepreneurs, the numbing out can just be simply workaholism, which in this Western culture is celebrated. Whereas in other cultures like New Zealand, where there's, quote, tall poppy syndrome, people who do workaholism, that particular vice is shunned. They're called tryhards. And like every vices are culturally entrenched. Like they can place in a cultural petri dish. Smoking in France is normal. Smoking in other parts of the Western world is not. And alcohol is accepted in many parts of the world, and it's outright banned and criminal in other parts. So, anesthetics are culturally defined as well. And there's this period of time in an entrepreneur's life. Typically, we'll just pick a approximate time frame of about 25 to 45, where you can get away with a lot. Before your system breaks down. And the actual breakdown is nothing theoretical. It's something we can check. Like you check your adrenal stress resilience system. You can check your mitochondrial system. We can check thyroid. We can check gut health. We can check neurotransmitters. We can check amino acids. We can check fatty acids. We can check minerals. We can check heavy metals, check for Lyme, mold, all these other things, and then check genetics. That when people break down, that the breakdown is actually measurable to a significant, staggering degree with today's technology. I mean, there's a term functional medicine, and as distinct from natural medicine, as distinct from Western medicine. Functional medicine is the meeting point. It's the estuary between the two. So it's the best of Western medical lab diagnostics combined with the best of natural medicine's lifestyle diet interventions. So we use the shiny toys that go bing on the Western med side to get the data, and then we look at the data and then implement lifestyle, diet, nutrition, etc. from the natural side in order to not just recalibrate and bring back to normal, but also to optimize. And that's the real gift of doing functional medicine. And it's the other trap that I see entrepreneurs get into is this, how would I put it? We call it othering the body, mechanization of the body. That the body is merely, it's a mechanization where we're treating this body as this expensive nuisance we're obligated to maintain so that we can do the entrepreneurial thing.
Yeah.
And like it's this meat suit, it's this complicated meat suit that's just kind of the thing we got to put in whatever the equivalent into the slot machine there to just keep it going and hit next life on the arcade button. So you just keep going, and you're putting in coffee, you're putting in sugar or whatever it might be. So there's many traps entrepreneurs fall into, and things I deeply understand. I'm an entrepreneur myself, and I also again saw it with what happened to my mom. And what I want to prevent is what happened to her, which was she got really burned out and got into really non-trivial health issues, and also she made some really poor decisions on behalf of me, because she did not budget her personal health and well-being as something to budget for. And it was this creep of consequences of just, and you don't remember, like, if it's so gradual but yet consistent, this negative trajectory, then you don't have perspective of how far down the road you've actually gone in a negative way.
Well, so I mean, tactically speaking, like how do you recommend preventing getting burnt out? Is there does one do a self-assessment, go through all these things? Are there some?
There's a couple things. One is focusing on your why, and I know this may seem a bit meta. We'll get into super tactical, where to go, what to look at, etc. in a minute. But the meta level has to be addressed, and I think in a bit more fine detail. Yeah. So I talked 5 extra years of healthy life. Okay, so what is the point of being an entrepreneur? What is the point? It is to do what other people's are not willing to do in order to have the life that other people don't have. So creating positive, meaningful changes in society. So you want to be able to enjoy the fruits of your labor. And there's Dan Sullivan talks about the 4 reasons people become an entrepreneur: freedom of time, freedom of purpose, freedom of money, and freedom of relationships. And there's a 5th freedom that he hasn't mentioned explicitly, which is health freedom. That you can't enjoy these other 4 unless you've got your health to enjoy it. And why 5 years of extra healthy life? Well, my father is currently going through dementia. And this is the same man who wrote 2 books, defined a field of study, got a MacArthur Award, yet can't remember what day it is. And I don't think people worked all this time in order to end up being absent, at best absent-minded and possibly a burden to those around them. Yeah. So even if, staving off neurodegeneration is not on people's radars too far afield, it doesn't have to be neurodegeneration. It could be pick your chronic aging disease du jour that runs in your family, which, by the way, your family history reveals what genetic weaknesses you have. It doesn't mean you are guaranteed to express those weaknesses. It just shows you where the fault lines are genetically. Sure. And then if you put the lifestyle changes in place ahead of time, you minimize the impact of those fault lines down the line. I've got lots and lots of fault lines in my family. And so this is very on the radar for me, whether it's neurodegeneration, heart disease, etc. Then the other why of how is it that people can end up budget for health and resilience and wellness, and actually end up saving and even making tons of money in the long term, because how many times have entrepreneurs, how many times have you made bad decisions that cost you a lot of money when you were either hangry or foggy brained or distracted? And then there's the money people spend on fad diets, or their shelves or drawers or separate room full of supplements or whatever that are just Band-Aids because they never actually did the testing to see if they actually need it or not. And I know the cost of poor health. I had over a decade of crippling insomnia, chronic pain from injuries sustained from a violent school, anxiety, depression, 2 addictions, and I had terrible gut problems that were so bad. I'm quite comfortable talking about it. I gassed that was so bad it would kill flies, melt paint, and empty yoga rooms. So if people told me now what I do today, 25 years ago, it would have saved me so much time, so much money, and I've had a lot more yoga friends. And the other piece is that if people are wanting to have 50 extra quality minutes a day, here's the reality, that if, according to interruption science, which is a thing, interruption science, it takes on average 23 minutes and 15 seconds to return back to full focus after a single interruption, whether that's a phone call or a notification or a social media alert, or you hungry, or you think about food in a time where it's not mealtime. So, I mean, how many times have you found yourself thinking about food in the middle of a task, or magically finding yourself foraging at the fridge because, 2 hours prior, you're just making sure the food didn't move around on its own, from when you last checked 2 hours ago. This every time you do that, you forage for food. That's like, say it's 2 minutes to forage and 23 minutes plus to recalibrate. That's 25 minutes. Do it twice a day. There's your 50 minutes.
Yeah.
So if people really key into their proper nutrition, their proper diet, looking at the genetics of their diet, and really take care of themselves, they can add 5 extra years of healthy life. They can save themselves 50 grand if you account for all the money saved on fad diets, Band-Aid supplements, and other diet-based caused complications down the line from an incongruent diet. Plus, you make better business decisions because you're not hangry, foggy-brained, and tired. And then you've also got 50 extra minutes of quality time per day, because it's quality time. It's not quantity of 50 minutes. It's the quality that I'm referring to. So those are the 3 big whys. So that's kind of the meta. That's the meta piece. Then there's the practical piece. Before I jump into the practical pieces, is there anything you want to comment or share?
No, I keep going. This is great.
Okay. So there's 5. The most practical immediate thing anyone can do is identify their optimal diet. And there are 5 main layers to doing that. And for those of you who need a visual, I've got a free ebook. People can, we'll talk about it at the end where to go to get it. But it's basically
I'll put it in the show notes, links too, and all that stuff.
Yeah, there's visuals involved, but it's pretty simple. It's just it's a triangle with 5 layers to it. It's a pyramid with five layers. The very bottom foundational layer is genetics. So genetics foundation is, what's your carb tolerance? Are you genetically best suited for keto, paleo, Mediterranean, or high carb? Those 4. There's shades of gray, because there are higher carb Mediterranean, there's lower carb Mediterranean. Now, the low carb Mediterranean is not as high carb as the high carb paleo, and the low carb paleo is not as high carb as the keto. So I know there's a bit of a word salad there, but there's a spectrum there. But you can actually genetically determine where you are best suited. The high carb people do exist, much to the chagrin of the keto people, and the keto does exist, much to the chagrin of the high carb people. So, but they exist genetically. It's real. And then there's genetic trigger foods. Like, are you genetically vulnerable to things like, some of the more common ones would be like lactose intolerance and gluten risk for celiac. But there's also other things like histamine intolerance. Are you genetically vulnerable to, and this is real because it affects me genetically, caffeine-induced anxiety and depression? Are people confusing anxiety for energy? Now, nothing in a room of entrepreneurs I'm lecturing to makes their sphincters clench more than saying that coffee may be causing anxiety and depression. You can hear the oxygen just suck out of the room the moment I say that. Just gone. Like, people are like up in their seats and scared. So anyway, so genetic caffeine-induced anxiety and depression. I am that. I have a homozygous variant, which is fancy saying red dot, fancy saying I'm vulnerable to that. So I've cut out caffeine, and I've switched to non-caffeine alternatives. There's also the genetic vulnerability to overeating of certain foods and flavors, whether it's sugar, fat, bitter, and there's genetic realities to people's food behaviors that if you know your genetic vulnerabilities, it's not about changing your willpower, it's about changing your environment. I do not do well with bread in the house. I am not stronger than bread, but I am smarter than it. I'm smarter than it, so I just keep it out of the house. And so that's me changing my environment. I can win without struggle, despite my genetic vulnerabilities. So the genetics is the layer that most people miss. And I'm not talking about some 23andMe, necessarily some 23andMe and Ancestry thing. It's not what, they first off, it's a totally different genetics analysis to identify the carb tolerance. The food triggers and food behaviors, that is, in the normal variant analysis in these genetics panels. But the carb tolerance, that's a completely different genetic analysis. It's a three-dimensionality where you look at the number of duplicates of a particular gene, like the number of cannons lining a fort. And if you've got one cannon, it shoots out a certain number of enzymes that break down carbs. If you've got 9 copies of this gene, then you have 9 cannons firing out. And so you have 9x the amount of enzymes. So people have a higher number of these genes, a higher number of duplicates of these genes, like an extra cannons lining the fort. They are genetically higher carb tolerant because they literally have more genes lined up all to just fire. Whereas people with really few number of genes, relatively few number of genes have a low carb tolerance. Like for me, I had the most Portlandia Mediterranean diet ever. I knew the names of my farmers, their chickens. The quinoa was grown on a harvest moon, picked by left-handed monks, sung in low tone, the whole thing. And I was still having this, paint melting, fly killing, yoga room emptying gas. And what it was that when I ran my genetics, is that genetically I wasn't Mediterranean. I was low carb paleo. I have the second lowest carb tolerance you can have. I was eating like a moderate carb Mediterranean. It wasn't a quality issue. It was a quantity issue of carbs. It wasn't quality.
Interesting.
So within 1 week of changing my diet to my genetic capacity for carbs, my digestive problems over 20 years went away. That soon. It was not a quality issue. It was a quantity. I was eating incongruently based on my genetic carb tolerance. So that's the genetics. It's carb tolerance, food triggers, food behaviors. Those 3. Then that's the first layer. Then the second layer is what I call the therapeutic layer. Now, this is where things can get a bit complicated. Because therapeutic layer is, do you have an acute, or not even acute, do you have an ongoing, possibly acute issue that is complicating your diet? So, for example, if you are keto genetically, but you have an ongoing functional problem with your gallbladder, your gut lining, your carnitine shuttle that's supposed to bring fats to your mitochondria to burn for energy, or a problem with the mitochondria itself, you cannot use the fat that you are genetically suited for because you've got some other issues going on. So if you eat high fat like you should genetically, you're going to feel terrible because you can't handle it metabolically. What I call that is your genetics are wrapped in what I've dubbed metabolic barbed wire. Wrapped in metabolic barbed wire. So you need to get through to that ketogenetic nirvana, but you can't because there's all this barbed wire in the way. The inverse is also true. If you're genetically high carb, but you've got a candida infection or some other infection or SIBO, whatever, where it blooms when you feed it carbs, you now have an infection that's feeding off of a high carb diet that forms the metabolic barbed wire, wrapping your genetic predisposition to have a high carb diet. So if you eat high carb, you're in trouble metabolically, but if you eat low carb, you're in trouble genetically. And so the way to know that you are having metabolic barbed wire is very straightforward. You have tried all of the diets and none of them work long term. It's very simple. It's so straightforward because you're always hitting the barbed wire or you're eating incongruently with your genetics. Yeah. So no matter what, you're not gonna get there. So the solution is you first do functional testing to identify what the metabolic issue is, and then you follow the protocols to defang the metabolic barbed wire. You defang the barbed wire with one set of diet and protocols, etc. Then when it's defanged, then you can return to your underlying genetic predisposition. So you see how like one diet to rule them all for this episode doesn't work because they need a therapeutic diet first before they can get to their genetic diet second. Yeah. So that's the therapeutic layer. And this is where the first layer was genetics testing. The second layer is functional testing. That's the hormones, that's gut testing, that's mitochondria, amino acids, fatty acids, blood sugars, iron, all the things. So that's the second layer. The third layer is preference. So what were you raised with? Do you have any do you have any restrictions around personal preference, religion, or cultural norms, things like that, where you do not eat a thing like for example, eating like clean pasture-fed, pasture-finished liver that's prepared properly is like super healthy. But there are certain cultures, religions, etc., where eating meat or it's not appropriate for them. So there's personal preference. Other people may have just had one too many aviation-themed food traumas growing up. Here comes the plane, of whatever it is, liver or broccoli, and they're just like they start shaking at the thought of whatever that thing is at age 5 coming at their face, So there's preferences there. There are genetic components to this as well for food preferences, but really we can recommend the best diet in the world, but if someone is not willing to do it and they're not willing to work through whatever that thing is to get past it, then we have to adapt and we have to take that seriously. The fourth layer is access. So access is an issue because there's a lot of food deserts around here, and not everyone has, a farmer's market that is reliable all year round with organic local food all the time. That just simply doesn't exist all around in most places. So there's also, if you're an entrepreneur, you travel, you have business meals, you're in a rush. What is accessible that is realistic for your time, are you on the road, family life, social, whatever it might be. So all those variables affect your access to quality food. And that has to be figured out based on your current lifestyle and where you want to go with your health, well-being, and all the rest of it. Then the last layer is what I call the earth layer. Earth layer is how your perceptions of how your diet affects your local and global economy, politics, and the environment. Now, this is not going to be a discussion about what things cause what. And notice I said very specifically, your perceptions about how you perceive your diet affecting politics, environment, and economy. Because we don't have 27 hours to go into all the nuances of that. It is a layer. That it is a reality for people. Like how I eat affects these things. So some people would claim that this is the most important layer. And I say that is dead wrong. I say the most important layer is your genetics layer. And once you understand your genetics foundation of how you best operate, then you adapt your wider concerns of environment, politics, and economy to that. I am not into someone being masochistic and sacrificing their genetic predispositions on some contrived altar of global concerns. I think there's so many things that can be done. I'll give you an example. So if you're genetically keto and you eat a lot of animal fat and protein, and you have some flag you want to plant, then you can help end factory farming and move towards smaller pasture-fed farming, or like insectivores or whatever. And if you're a high-carb person and you think eating meat it's not your thing or not so needed for you, then you can focus on stopping, massive amounts of sprays for, these weird genetically modified crops, which are basically used to patent food to then dump more patented sprays and pesticides on them. So you can have that environmental concern of GMOs and heavy sprays, and then the keto people can have the factory farming concerns, and we can all be on the same side, Right. So that's why I say focus on your genetics first before you start waving flags for global concerns. So those are the 5 layers: genetic, therapeutic, personal preference, access, and earth. And my suggestion to people is you start with the genetics, because that is you at your most fundamental level. The genetics don't change no matter how old you are or where you live or anything. The genetics are what they are, end of story, full stop. Yeah. That's where to start. And if you know your genetics, everything else can fall into place, because then you can now figure out, okay, this is where I need to go. And if you start eating and operating within your genetic parameters and you're still not getting to where you want, that's the signal to know you need to look at the therapeutic layer. So that's what I would recommend. If people want to get started on that, they can just simply go to my website, drsamshay.com, drsamshay.com. I have a free e-guide on how to identify your ideal diet. I've got another ebook called Biohack Your Biohacking, which is my 10 pillars of health model, plus understanding more functional testing, the hormones, mitochondria, gut testing, etc. And then I have another ebook on genetics as well that goes through the bigger picture of genetics beyond just diet. So those are the practical things that I recommend. This conception of diet is a 5-layered process, and the bottom 2 layers are test-oriented, is data driven. What you need to figure out in terms of genetics and in terms of your metabolism.
That's awesome. It makes sense to me, right? To start with, like, hey, everybody's built different. There is no like one size fits all in pretty much anything. As much as we'd like to say that and do that, I'm curious, like, how much controversy is there around your approach to how you do this? Because when we start talking about this kind of stuff, I know people have their thoughts, opinions, beliefs, things that they've grown up with, and I'm hoping to just kind of present like, hey, here's one doctor's opinion. I don't necessarily agree, disagree, whatever, but it is very, very interesting. So I'm just curious, from like in your field, in the world of other doctors and professional dietitians and blah, 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 is there a lot of pushback on your approach to how you're trying to help people?
I've literally gotten zero pushback.
Yeah.
I've zero.
Well,
and I say zero, I mean zero, because every single clinician I've talked to, every podcast I've been on, every summit where I've talked about this, live seminar where I've spoken about this, and there are people who are on wildly opposing dietary points on the culinary spectrum. I have gotten literally zero pushback, because I am not prescribing a singular diet. I am recommending, here is the thought process and the tools to figure it out. And by the way, this whole process accounts for all y'all. It accounts for, I'm being grammatically correct. I'm saying all y'all.
Yeah, totally. Obviously.
Grammatically correct. All right. I did spend 5 years in Texas. And I am not attacking or venerating a singular diet. Not at all. And there's, as far as I can tell, this entire model is completely bulletproof, because it accounts for individual genetics, it accounts for metabolic, therapeutic, barbed wire realities, it accounts for people's personal preferences, it accounts for the logistics of sourcing food that is appropriate to you if you can get it reliably all year round at a reasonable price, fresh. It's like it. And it accounts for the bigger picture. Also, I do not know of a single system out there that encompasses all of this, except this one. So, zero pushback, because I do not attack and I do not venerate. Neither a singular diet.
That's cool. Another question would be, okay, so let's just say I want to go through these 5 stages. Genetics, I don't like. Where how do I do that? Like, what do I?
Oh, that's the genetics. Contact me, and that's the simple answer. So there's very, very, very few of us that actually do this carb tolerance test, because it's not a 23andMe ancestry, variant analysis. It's a different lab. It's a different process. It's not something you can like convert over from another thing. It's a totally separate swab. It's a totally separate lab. And but it's very simple. It's literally a cheek swab, 30 seconds to a minute on one side, 30 seconds the other, and then mail it off in the self-addressed stamped envelope, and then we package it off and send it to the lab. It's pretty straightforward. And it's of all the tests, the other functional tests, you got to like pee in something, spit in something, poop in something, get your blood drawn. None of that's involved with the genetics. I know you're disappointed. I know.
I'm such a middle
I know.
schooler.
I know you're disappointed. Like, did you grow up with Beavis and Butthead? He said poop.
I mean, yeah, maybe. Yes.
Okay,
That's pretty cool.
Fine. Anyway, yeah, we're professionals here for people
totally
listening.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we've successfully talked about gas and poop on a podcast. I'm sure that was bucket list.
And it didn't even come from me this time.
It didn't come from me this time, right? Okay, right. Okay, that's funny. So yeah, it's really straightforward. And here's the other thing about genetics: the results don't change over time. If you're talking about business owners, then they understand amortization. Okay. When people invest in really high quality, meaningful, impactful, long-term genetics analysis, the investment is worth it. Amortize over how many decades you're living. How much is that worth to you in terms of, I know what diet I need to eat now.
Right.
Therefore, we talked about saving $50,000 in fad diets, Band-Aids, supplements, and losing money from making poor decisions because you were hangry, fatigued, or foggy brained. And then just the ability to make better business. Fly just landed on me. So I wasn't like brushing my aura with my hair for those of you watching the visual. You also make better decisions to make more money because you're not fatigued, foggy brained, or hangry. So the investment, when people look at it as amortized over however many decades longer you plan on living, and know that the results, they don't change over time. Your genetics are what they are.
Well, one thing that we didn't talk about, we talked about diet and all this other stuff, but you never brought up exercise. Is that like part of any of this?
Sure. So if you're genetically a low carb tolerance, that maps brilliantly onto exercise protocols for you're more attuned for high intensity interval training. Because if you are genetically lower carb tolerance, that means that your genetics evolved in a part of the world where you had to run after your food as opposed to walk around and grow it. And so if you're lower carb tolerance you are, the more high intensity interval training makes sense. And you can see this on like the like I'm blanking on the studies, but I've seen the studies where it's like it tracks like VO2 max and like also it tracks your insulin, the insulin acceleration curve, etc. And if you are of a higher carb tolerance, that means that you are in a zone of the world where there was a higher genetic pressure to have higher carbs more long term, more year round, because there was more grain formation and or other higher carb food products, that you're more genetically predisposed to like longer form moderate cardio because you're walking around your farm or just going longer distances and not sprinting so much. So the exercise piece is also meaningfully influenced by your genetics.
Yeah. Wow. That's so interesting. Man, this has been so good. Tons of really, really good information, stuff that I've never really thought about in this context. So appreciate your perspective. So tell us again where people can find you and follow along with all the cool stuff that you're doing.
Sure. So it's www.drsamshay.com, drsamshay.com. And on my website, you'll see at the top of the fold an opportunity to opt in for my Find Your Ideal Diet e-guide, which goes over this in more detail. And then at the time of this recording, you can also click to schedule a free 15-minute chat with me personally to see if my approach, this genetics labs, functional lab approach, you're a good fit for this approach. And that's the easiest way to engage with me. I also have a YouTube channel where you can just put my name, literally Dr. Sam Shay, into YouTube. You can find my 100 or so videos. I also have a complete stand-up comedy playlist there as well, where that's obviously the most important thing to go look up, of course. And obviously. And yeah, it's the comedy stuff's been a lot of fun. And but there is like a lot of my summits interviews and podcast interviews and other just webinars I've given. I've just populated up on YouTube. So if people like what they see or hear, there's lots more of it available online.
Yeah, I love it. That's great. And obviously, like, you know, the part of a best part of a balanced diet is laughter. So the comedy is just, it's gotta be there. This is great. How do you want to leave us today?
By pressing the leave button on the interview thing?
Yeah, that's one way. Definitely one way. Here he is, folks.
Okay,
here's our lead himself.
Okay, so here's our lead. Let's say thank you, Ryan, for doing this.
Oh,
I know that I'm probably a non-standard guest on your Grow Your Video business.
Yes.
I was like, who's this, guy who looks like a reformed supervillain talking on camera, and my hope is that I was able to bring a novel lens to how people can grow their video business by not focusing on a specific piece of equipment or editing technique, but really it's about the long game. Why are you an entrepreneur? Why are you doing this? My suspicion is it's basically the 4 freedoms that Dan Sullivan so articulately lays out: freedom of time, freedom of money, freedom of purpose, and freedom of association. And don't sacrifice your 5th freedom, your health freedom, because you're going to need it to create those 4 freedoms, and you're going to need your health freedom to enjoy those 4 freedoms. And your health freedom starts with knowing your optimal diet. That's foundational. And the foundation of the foundation is genetics. Next layer up is the therapeutic layer. Next layer up is preference, then access, then earthly concerns. So I really love helping entrepreneurs a lot. I'm one myself. My history of me and my mom and her having difficulties as an entrepreneur with her health. So I'm here to help entrepreneurs and moms. And I would encourage people to, at a minimum, just get my ebook and then be on my newsletter and keep abreast of all the other information and things I'm going to be sharing about health and resilience and entrepreneurship going forward.
Love it. Brilliant. Thank you so much. This has been really cool.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right, my friend, thank you so much for hanging out with us on this episode. Remember, the show notes have the specific links that we talked about. You can go to Dr. Shay's website, download his free ebook. If you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know, what is your takeaway from this chat? Is he on to something? Am I crazy for having him on? I don't know. Love to hear from you. You can also email me, ryan@studiosherpas.com. But if this did resonate with you, as it did for me, thinking about how I'm spending my time and energy, like with my diet and this one body that I have, this is the only body that I'm getting. I think that was a pretty challenging perspective that he brought up. So anyway, we'd love to hear from you. Remember, you can follow us on the socials at Grow Your Video Business. And also, by the time that this recording goes, this is probably my last invitation to the Onward Summit. Anytime, like shortly after this episode, you're probably going to just have to join the wait list to hear about next year's Onward Summit, if I decide to host the summit next year. So maybe there's a little urgency there that you should get in on this one, the 3rd annual. Anyway, that's that. You can get all that info at studiosherpas.com/onward for the in-person event at our studio near Detroit, Michigan. We'd love to have you. It'd be super fun. That's it. I'm going to see you on next week's episode. I've got episode 300 coming up. If you're in the mood and you just want to send like a, Ryan, I love the show, thank you so much, 300 episodes, woohoo, send those over quick so I can read some of them on the 300th episode. Just to make sure that, are there still people that listen to this show? Hello? Anybody there? Just teasing. But I appreciate you so much. And this is, again, such a joy for me to be able to have this show, to be able to help you. I've made some incredible friends, have met some amazing people over the last few years of doing this show. And I just want to say thank you for making it literally this far into the episode. So I will see you next week. Until then, peace out, onward and upward. Adios, amigo. Goodbye.